We have this cultural obsession with the idea that parenting is a solo sport.
Right. Like it's all on you.
Yes, we think it is entirely about personality.
Mm-hmm.
If you are a patient parent, you are a saint.
Mm.
If you are a yelling parent, well, you have anger issues.
It is all internal.
But the data argues that is fundamentally wrong. Or at least, it's missing half the picture. The core concept here is that parenting does not happen in a vacuum. It happens in a context.
Right.
And if you want to understand why parents act the way they do, you have to look at the invisible machinery surrounding them. We call these contextual determinants.
The textual determinants, it sounds a bit dry, but when you really dig into it, it is actually the stuff of everyday life. It is the water we are swimming in.
Think of it like a theater production. We usually focus solely on the actors, right? The parent and the child.
Yeah.
We sit there and critique their performance.
Yeah.
But these determinants, they're the set design, the lighting, the director, the script. If the stage is literally on fire, the actor's performance is going to change.
Regardless of how talented they are.
Exactly.
I love that visual. So our mission today is to walk through 4 massive gears that turn this machine. And looking at the breakdown, these are big ones. We have employment, stress, social support, and neighborhood.
These are the major forces that just constantly press down on the family unit.
So let's start with the one that consumes most of our waking life. Work. There is a phrase used to describe this that really stuck with me, the long arm of the job.
It is evocative, isn't it?
Yeah.
The long arm of the job basically means that your employment does not respect boundaries. We like to think we leave work at the door, but we don't.
We really don't.
The job reaches into your car, follows you into the kitchen, and it sits right down at the dinner table with your kids.
And we aren't just talking about money here, are we?
Yeah.
We aren't just talking about whether you can afford braces. It is more about the psychological intrusion.
Precisely. It is not a binary of employed versus unemployed. It is about the quality of the experience. The research breaks it down into objective things, like, do you work nights? Is the work physically dangerous?
Right.
And then the subjective things. Do you hate your boss? Is the work boring? Is it soul-crushing?
Which brings us to the spillover effect. This is something I think every working parent feels intuitively, but I didn't realize it had been quantified like this.
Oh, it definitely has. There was a really fascinating study by Majasko and Feldman. They look at exactly what emotions parents carry from the workplace into the home, and they found a very distinct gender difference.
This is where it gets super interesting. Break that down for us.
So for mothers in the study, the spillover was a bit of a mixed bag. It was highly responsive to the actual day. If a mother had a great day, she hit a deadline, got a compliment, she brought home positive energy.
Okay.
If she had a bad day, she brought home anger or anxiety. It was a direct transfer of the specific emotion from the office.
So she is essentially a mirror of her workday, but the fathers were different.
Significantly. The fathers in the study primarily brought home anxiety and withdrawal. That was the dominant spillover emotion, pretty much regardless of the nuance of the day.
Wow, that is heavy. So you have a dad walking in the door, and before he's even put his keys down, the entire mood of the living room just shifts.
Right. The kids sense it. The spouse senses it. And suddenly the parenting style changes. Maybe he is shorter with the kids. Maybe he retreats to the garage.
Right, and not because he is a bad father.
Exactly. But because the long arm of the job is just weighing on him.
Now, there is a distinction made here between 2 terms that sound really similar but are actually quite different. Role conflict and role strain.
I feel like I definitely have both, but help me distinguish them.
It is a subtle but important difference. Role conflict is when you feel torn between 2 totally different statuses or identities. You want to be the dedicated employee who stays late, but you also want to be the dedicated parent who is at the soccer game.
You physically cannot be in 2 places at once.
Right. You are in conflict.
It is the classic guilt trip. You are at work worrying about home, and at home worrying about work.
Exactly. That is conflict. Role strain, on the other hand, is the tension within a single role. It is when the demands of just being a parent are too much for one person to handle. That is the laundry, the cooking, the driving, the emotional regulation, the homework, help.
The mental load.
Yeah.
The sheer volume of tasks. And the data shows that while fathers are doing way more childcare than they used to, which is a great positive trend, mothers still experience significantly more role strain.
Because they are often the ones managing the logistics of the household on top of their employment.
Exactly.
But, and here is where the data threw me, a total curveball work is not always the villain here. We usually tell the story to ourselves that working parents are neglecting their kids. But there is something called the buffer theory.
Yes, and this is vital to understand. We tend to assume that our energy is a fixed pie.
Mm,
If you give a huge slice to work, you naturally have less for your kids.
right.
But the buffer theory suggests that for many parents, work actually acts as a recharge station.
Which sounds totally counterintuitive. How does working make you a better parent?
Well, think about the nature of parenting. It can be incredibly repetitive, chaotic, sometimes pretty thankless. A toddler does not thank you for the mac and cheese. They throw it at you.
That is very true.
Work, ideally, offers adult conversation. It gives you a sense of competence. You have structured tasks that you can actually finish and cross off a list.
So you go to the office to feel like a competent human adult, so that when you come home, you actually have the patience to deal with the chaos again.
Exactly. It buffers you against the stress of parenting. If the job is fulfilling, that positive energy spills over and makes you a warmer, more engaged parent.
Speaking of chaos, that brings us to the second big gear in the machine, stress.
Hmm.
And I have to say, the definition of stress here was not what I normally expect. I usually just think of stress as bad things happening.
That is definitely the common usage. But in the context of family systems, the definition is much broader. Stress is defined as literally any event that forces the family system to change or reorganize.
Which means good things are stressors.
Huge stressors. A big promotion. Stress. Moving to a bigger, nicer house. Massive stress. Even the birth of a healthy, beautiful new baby is one of the biggest stressors a family can possibly face.
That is surprisingly validating, because you often feel guilty for being stressed when things are going well. You think, why am I snapping at everyone? We just got a puppy. We just got promoted.
It is entirely biological. Your system has to adapt to a new reality, and that takes energy. The researchers categorize these into life events, the big stuff like divorce or moving, and then the proximate stressors.
The daily grind.
Right, the daily hassles. The car won't start,
Yeah.
the dishwasher is broken, the kids are fighting. And then there's a specific category called parenting stress.
Which is the stress that comes directly from the role of parenting itself.
Yes, and from the child. Some children are just more difficult than others. If you have a child with a difficult temperament, maybe they are colicky or prone to intense tantrums, that creates a negative feedback loop.
So the child is difficult, the parent gets stressed, the parenting quality drops, and then the child's behavior gets worse.
Exactly.
Let's look at that drop in quality. When we are stressed, what actually happens to our parenting style, scientifically speaking?
It is very consistent across the data. Stressed parents are statistically less nurturant, less responsive, and more punitive.
We basically just yell more.
We yell more and we play less. We withdraw emotionally. And this is the key insight. It is not because the parent is a mean person. It is a resource depletion model.
Resource depletion.
Think of patience and empathy as fuel in a tank. Stress burns that fuel at an incredibly high rate. When the tank is empty, you physically cannot engage in that warm, patient, let's talk about your feelings kind of parenting.
You just switch to survival mode.
Yes, you become authoritarian because it is efficient, or you just check out completely because you are exhausted.
And the scary part is that these stressors stack up. It is never just one thing in isolation.
Right, that brings up the risk index concept.
Sure.
This was a really staggering statistic. They looked at families with various risk factors. Poverty, single parenthood, low education, things like that. If a family had only one risk factor, the chance of them having a low-quality home environment, meaning harsh or disengaged parenting, was about 22%.
Okay, so 22%, not great, but manageable.
But if you stack them up, families with 6 risk factors had an 88% chance of a low-quality home environment.
Wow.
It becomes almost a mathematical certainty. If you pile enough structural weight on a parent, the parenting will collapse. It is not a character flaw. It is physics.
So if stress is the poison, there is an antidote. Gear number 3, social support.
The buffer against the storm.
But we need to be specific here, because this isn't just about having friends on Facebook.
No, not at all. It is split into emotional comfort, which is feeling loved, having someone to vent to, and instrumental assistance.
Which is the person who actually shows up with a casserole.
Or the neighbor who watches the kids for an hour so you can take a nap.
Yeah.
That instrumental help is absolute gold. But here is the nugget that I found absolutely fascinating. Statistically, it does not matter how much support you actually get. It matters how satisfied you feel with it. It is entirely about perception. You could have people helping you all day, but if you feel judged, or if you feel like you're a burden to them, that support does not lower your stress.
That makes a lot of sense.
Conversely, just knowing you could call your mom if the house burned down might be enough to keep you calm, even if you never actually pick up the phone to call her.
It is like the placebo effect of having a village.
In a way, yes. And the effects are incredibly powerful. There was a study on Dutch parents of children with cancer. Talk about an unimaginable stressor.
Truly the ultimate nightmare.
The study found that fathers who had high levels of social support showed significantly less distress than those who didn't. The support literally cushioned the blow of a traumatic life event, allowing them to remain more present for their kids.
And there was also that study on African-American single mothers.
Right, that one showed that strong social support led to more nurturant parenting, effectively mitigating some of the crushing weight of poverty. It broke the link between financial stress and harsh parenting.
However, and this is a massive transition to our final gear, there was a caveat in that study. A specific point where the antidote just stopped working.
The absolute limit of the buffer.
The study found that in extremely high-crime, dangerous neighborhoods, the link between social support and warm parenting weakened. The environment was just too overwhelming.
Which brings us to the fourth, and definitely the most intense gear, the neighborhood context.
Some pretty intense language is used here. War zones, toxic atmospheres. We aren't talking about a suburb with a loud dog next door. We are talking about urban poverty, where physical safety is a minute-by-minute concern.
And this is where the data really challenges us the most. Because if you were an outsider looking in, you might see a parent in this environment acting in a way that looks bad.
Harsh or overly restrictive.
Right. Maybe they don't let their kid play outside at all. Maybe they are super strict about absolute obedience. Maybe they physically discipline them more.
And the knee-jerk reaction, especially if you are looking at this from a safe, quiet neighborhood, is to say, wow, that is toxic parenting. They are crushing that child's spirit.
But the expert insight here is that this is a strategic adaptation. Why would a mother in a dangerous neighborhood be hyper-restrictive? To keep her child from getting caught in crossfire.
Right.
Why might she encourage toughness or aggressive play? Because in her specific context, passivity makes you a target.
So they're effectively pre-arming their children for the reality they live in.
Exactly. The warm, fuzzy, let them explore the world style of parenting, that is a privilege of safety. If you live in a safe suburb, you can afford to let your child wander and trust the neighbors. If you live in a war zone, that same behavior is negligent. It is dangerous.
It really forces you to reframe everything. You have to stop and ask, what is this parent protecting their child against?
The tragedy, of course, is that while this high-alert parenting keeps the child physically safe, it comes at a significant cost. The data shows that parents in these environments are often so stressed and so focused purely on survival that the emotional warmth of the relationship suffers. They simply can't afford to be soft.
So we have these 4 gears spinning: employment, stress, social support, and neighborhood. But the final piece of the puzzle is how they all connect, because they do not act alone, do they?
No, they are a complex mesh. We talked about the risk index, the additive effect of stacking them up, but there's also something called mediation.
Okay, unpack this concept for us, because this seems like a more hopeful part of the science.
It is. Mediation is basically about the filter. Take economic hardship. Being poor is hard. That is an objective fact. But the data shows that poverty itself does not automatically ruin parenting. It is mediated by the parent's feeling of economic strain.
Wait, distinguish that for me. Hardship versus strain.
Hardship is the actual math. How much money is in the bank account? Strain is the psychological weight. It is how worried you are about that math. If a parent has a mindset or a community or a deep faith that keeps them from feeling utterly crushed by that strain, the parenting suffers less. The objective reality of the bank account is exactly the same, but the psychological filter completely changes the outcome.
That is fascinating. So your attitude or your philosophy actually functions as a gear in the machine itself. It can physically disconnect the stress from the behavior.
It absolutely can. And then alongside mediation, there is compensation. A strong positive can compensate for a negative.
Like a seesaw.
Exactly like a seesaw. Let's say you have an incredibly stressful job, high-role conflict. You are exhausted. But you have an incredibly supportive grandmother who lives next door and helps with the kids every single afternoon.
Right.
That social support compensates for the work stress.
Yeah.
The system finds a balance.
It implies that you do not need a perfect life to be a good parent. You just need enough pluses to balance out the minuses.
That is the ultimate takeaway here.
Yeah.
It is dynamic. You can be a great parent in a really tough situation if you have just one sturdy gear working in your favor.
So, zooming out a bit, we have gone through the gears. We have dismantled this idea of the perfect parent living in a vacuum, What does this actually change for you, the listener, aside from hopefully making us all feel a little less guilty about our bad days?
I think it fosters what I would call radical empathy.
Radical empathy. I really like that.
When we see a parent struggling, maybe they're ignoring their kid at the park or snapping at them in the grocery store checkout line, our immediate instinct is to judge their character.
Oh, always. We love to moralize it. We turn it into a character flaw immediately. We say, they're impatient or they're selfish. I would never do that.
Right. But the science tells us we should be asking a totally different set of questions. What is their context? What is happening with their job today?
Yeah.
How high is their stress index right now? Do they have any support? Is their neighborhood safe?
It stops us from viewing parenting as just a series of isolated individual choices and helps us see it as a reaction to a much larger environment.
Good parenting is infinitely easier when the context allows for it. It requires massive resources, emotional, financial, and social resources. When those are depleted by the environment, parenting quality naturally drops. It is not usually a moral failing, it is a systemic one.
That is a heavy but really important realization. It shifts the blame from the individual person to the surrounding structure.
And it raises a massive question for us as a society. If we actually want better-raised children, we can't just keep telling parents to be nicer or to read more books. We have to look at the structures, the jobs, the neighborhoods, the community support systems. Are we building environments that even allow parents to succeed?
That is exactly what I want everyone listening to leave with today. Next time you see a parent out in the wild, or the next time you are the parent having a meltdown in the kitchen, don't just look at the person. Look at the invisible gears turning around them.
And maybe, just maybe, offer a little bit of that social support. It might literally be the buffer they need that day.
Well said. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. We've talked so much about jobs and neighborhoods acting as these massive gears. If parenting is this heavily dictated by our environment, what happens when the environment fundamentally shifts overnight?
Like what we're seeing now.
Exactly. With the massive rise in remote work, the long arm of the job isn't just reaching into the home anymore. The job literally lives in the living room. Are these current shifts in how we work creating an entirely new gear in this machine that we don't even have a name for yet?
That is a huge question. It completely rewrites the boundaries we just talked about.
Something to think about the next time you're trying to send an email while making a sandwich. That is it for this deep dive into the invisible forces of parenting. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you on the next one.